Time for another mediocre video. Hey folks, my name is Axel, and welcome to my new reaction channel where I react to all things gaming.
Unfortunately, we don't have anything to share right now.
Bitch. So I'm a games nerd, and I love gaming, and I love a lot of things about gaming. So naturally, when I hear new things about new games, it excites me greatly. I'm mainly a Nintendo fan, and they do a pretty decent job about announcing new games at regular intervals. It is something I would have told you a year ago. The way that Nintendo normally announces new games is by compiling a bunch of announcements and putting them into a Nintendo Direct presentation. And these things are the best. They're so much fun, and they usually have some really good announcements in them. A combination of smaller titles and indie titles and first-party games if they're feeling spicy about it. It's just so nice to sit down for a half an hour and just watch what games are coming. Learning more about titles you already knew about, or seeing new games entirely and deciding what games look interesting, or whether or not you want to pick them up later. It's just exciting in general. It's all just new games and stuff to play and just stuff to love, and it's great. For the games that Nintendo well and truly does not care about, they'll just throw them on the eShop for $5 and never speak of them again. I don't know about any of you guys, but I didn't end up seeing any trailers for Vroom in the Night Sky. If Nintendo considers it big enough or high quality enough to be in a Nintendo Direct, then that, at least for me, kind of signifies the quality of the game. But then, the dark times came. The Great Direct drought. I started wearing hats. Truly horrible times. Yeah, so the pandemic came, lockdown started, everyone started working from home, the entire world is basically fucked. Everyone has to start working from home in Japan, and that's not really a thing that happens. Forgive my ignorance if I'm wrong, but the Japanese typically don't work from home. It's not unheard of, but it's also uncommon, to the point where it was a pretty big adjustment for large corporations in Japan to start working from home suddenly, especially Nintendo. So as a result, 2020 turned out to be something of a breather year for Nintendo as they adjust to their new way of work. A lot of the games they were working on had to be pushed back a little bit, or they had to stop working on them until they got everything set up. Not a whole lot came out in 2020, to be perfectly honest. We did have stuff come out this year, don't get me wrong. Stuff like New Horizons and Origami King, and Age of Calamity scratched that little Zelda itch we all had, I imagine. But still, it was something of a barren year. And one more thing that made that a bit barren is that because they didn't have much to announce, they didn't do a whole lot of announcements. Throughout the entire year of 2020, Nintendo had absolutely no Nintendo Directs. They opted to have trailers for all their first-party stuff just announced on Twitter and put onto their YouTube channel. And then in terms of third-party stuff, they had what was called Nintendo Direct Mini Partner Showcases, where they just showed off a bunch of third-party stuff. And these were fun, but they weren't quite the same, in my opinion. They didn't even have anything for E3 this year. I mean, sure, E3 didn't even happen, but a lot of companies did release this sort of live stream where they talked about stuff in the time E3 would be. But Nintendo just didn't have it this year. Shorter announcements weren't bad by any means. It meant they could go into a bit more detail about games. It meant that rather than sectioning out 1 minute of a 30-minute long direct to go over a game, they could make a 12-minute video about one game and go into more detail, especially if people wanted more detail. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that the lack of a direct really helped them with Paper Mario the Origami King specifically. People were very cautious about this game after Color Splash and Sticker Star. So people really wanted to know more information about this game. So they released a big video just going over different factors about the game. They talked about everything that people might want to know about it. And that helped people warm up to the game a bit more over time. If they instead decided to try and condense all the stuff they talked about in that video into a 1 minute long clip and a 30-minute direct, I don't think it would have made nearly as much of an impact on people. In fact, a lot of ways, just announcing things on Twitter was much better than doing things with a direct. Nintendo Directs were a lot harder to do, in all honesty. It required that you had a lot of stuff to talk about with a lot of different games. Announcing things on Twitter one game at a time or one thing at a time allowed Nintendo to pace themselves a lot better during this year. we still had announcements at regular intervals. It wasn't completely barren. They just had more stuff to talk about. They just had more stuff to talk about. The Twitter thing wouldn't even have been that bad this year. If they just had more stuff to talk about, the Twitter stuff wouldn't even have been that bad this year. So here we have Nintendo with a better system that costs them less to do. And that honestly led me to believe that they would just ditch Nintendo Directs entirely. I'm not bagging at Nintendo at all for ditching Directs this year. It makes perfect sense why they do it. And I actually think it was the better decision to make. If ditching Nintendo Directs meant that the company would not only be safer, but would be more efficient during a confusing time, then that was the decision that had to have been made. I personally may not like the decision, or rather I may not have liked the results of that decision, but I still can't say it was a bad decision, and I'm still happy that that decision was made. And that is basically the gist of everything I wanted to talk about. But I went ahead and snagged this, so you're not going anywhere. I guess I could talk about the Direct itself. It was pretty decent, all things considered. Some new Smash stuff, DLC for Age of Calamity, Splatoon 3 of all things, a new Mario Golf. They showed Bravely Default 2 for the quadrillionth time. They had this one weird game that I think is a sort of dodgeball battle royale game. Because if it is dodgeball battle royale, I am buying it immediately. Let's see, what else? They had this one game that was like Triangle Strategy or something. That was a working title. It looks okay. It gives me kind of Fire Emblem vibes. Honestly, I never played a Fire Emblem game, so I'm not sure if I would be interested in a sort of knockoff of it. Also, speaking of, this Direct had a lot of RPGs in it. Here's an RPG, there's an RPG, that's an RPG, what? But in all honesty, I thought the Direct was very, very enjoyable. I think anyone who's complaining about the Direct being lackluster is really only saying that because they were gone for so long. We're honestly lucky that they came back at all. I think maybe people should simmer down a little. And then at the end they revealed this piece of shit, but hey, it's fine, it's cool, it's fresh. I didn't want Breath of the Wild 2, who did? So, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is getting an HD remaster put on Switch. This felt like a kick in the balls to me and only me. It wasn't even an HD collection. They have HD remasters of a lot of the previous Zelda games, so if they were going to make this one, then I think to drive people to buy it, it would have been better if they put all their HD games of the previous Zeldas into one package. I think that would have made it sell a lot more. But no, they decided that The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword was a good enough game that an HD remaster would sell on its own. Hey guys, I'm the one who's in charge of Zelda. Yeah? I bet you saw me and you were wondering about Breath of the Wild 2, right? Yeah? Unfortunately, no. We'll have something a little later, alright? Alright, fine. In the meantime, have this.